On yesterday's episode, we talked about how the Chicago Bulls are answering the early test pretty well so far. It was mainly positive on that episode, but I want to talk out one glaring concern with the Chicago Bulls starting lineup that the advanced data is telling us, and how the Chicago Bulls can work to kind of get that in gear as they continue to improve this season. We're also going to preview tonight's game against the Brooklyn Nets. All that and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host here, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today, y'all. So in yesterday's episode, I threw a lot of numbers at you guys as far as how the Chicago Bulls have surprisingly answered some of the bigger questions that I had for this team coming into the season, between the dynamic between Josh Giddey and Wiht kind of working out, Josh Giddey stepping up as a three-point shooter, Nikola Vucevic having a career year, and overall as well as Zach LaVine and how he's really refined and has become a really, really good player so far as just being efficient so far in this season. But there is one thing in me looking at the data and the advanced analytics that kind of was glaring in regards to the Chicago Bulls, and that's that the Chicago Bulls starting lineup hasn't necessarily had the best results when they're all on the court together. Now, that starting five, for those that don't know, is Wiht, Josh Giddey, Patrick Williams, Zach LaVine, and Nikola Vucevic. That's the Bulls starting five, right? And so far, that starting five has played 146 of the team's total 365 possessions so far together, and they have a point differential of negative 15 over that time. Now, that's not huge, right? That's not a huge concern there when you look at it. Negative 15 is you go on runs, your starting lineups out there more times than not. The Bulls have also gotten off to slow starts in the last two games, so that's definitely affected that point differential. But it's a little bit concerning there. But then also when you look at it and dive a little deeper into it, that same starting lineup actually is averaging 91.8 points per 100 possessions, and it's one of the lowest actually on the team. And so there's definitely some things that still can be worked out there as far as balance. I do think a big part is the runs and also the lack of kind of defense. Patrick Williams is the only defensive anchor in that starting lineup, and we've already talked about how Patrick Williams is actually having a pretty damn good defensive season. He just has definitely things that he needs to work on as well, as far as being a better shooter out there for the Chicago Bulls, because his shooting percentage has been trash, but he's still been solid. But overall, you're still looking at it and saying there's still something here with the Chicago Bulls starting lineup that they still got to figure out the balance to. Now, like I said before, I do think overall they'll be fine when it comes down to it. It'll even out over the course of the season, I believe, for the Chicago Bulls team. But seeing that they actually have one of the lowest points per 100 possessions, considering that the Bulls their three best starters are in that lineup, but it's kind of when those guys are staggering their minutes, do we see kind of the best lineups coming from those guys? And so that's just something to kind of look at and monitor as the season goes on. We'll do a deeper dive into it, but surprisingly enough, there are a couple lineups. One, the lineup with the best point differential and the best points per 100 possession is Josh Giddey, Wiht, Lonzo Ball, Zach LaVine, and Nikola Vucevic. Now, that lineup has only played 18 possessions together, but they do have a point differential of plus 91.2. They also have a points per 100 possessions of 233.3. Those are not sustainable at all. It also has a 95 effective field goal shooting percentage, by far the highest in the team, and maybe one of the highest in the NBA when it's all said and done. But we know that lineup you're not going to see a lot of, but mainly because Billy Donovan said he wants to stagger Josh Giddey and Lonzo Ball, at least for now. And of course, Lonzo's still on the back-to-backs and minutes restriction, things like that. But then when you look at the other two lineups that kind of surprisingly are really good so far for the Chicago Bulls, one that has a point differential of plus 66.7, that's Wiht, Ayo Dosunmu, Dalen Terry, Julian Phillips, and Jalen Smith out there. So four of the Bulls bench players actually out there with Wiht. And so that's why I think we're seeing more of Wiht start staggering minutes with the bench unit, because, hey, so far it's working pretty damn good for this team. And that's an interesting thing to see if we start seeing a little bit more of that as things come out as well. And another lineup that was surprising, so basically that same lineup of Kobe, Ayo, Dalen Terry, Jalen Smith, but if you flip that with Patrick Williams, that lineup has a point differential of plus 64.4 and 144 points per 100 possessions, effective field goal shooting of 55%. That other lineup with Julian Phillips in there has an effective field goal percentage of 63.6 as well. So that's something to look out for. Like, the one thing that you always like to watch over the course of a season, right, is where and how are your best lineups, right? And how feasible is it that you can play those lineups? How much can you play those lineups? Are they lineups that you go to with closing, right? Are they lineups to go to when you need a scoring punch, right? Maybe if your team is getting out to a deficit and the other team's getting out to a big run, do you explore those lineups then? So it's going to be interesting to see how the Bulls start developing that kind of clutch lineup in a way. And is it clutch at the end of games? Is it clutch when you need a run? That's something that I'm really interested to see how it develops. Now, one thing with that, with saying that the Bulls starting lineups right now of Kobe, Josh Giddey, Zach LaVine, P. Will, and Nikola Vucevic have one of the worst point differentials that are for the Chicago Bulls so far. What have been the best lineups for those players? When you look at Josh Giddey has had his best lineups, of course, when he's out there with Lonzo Ball, but again, we're going to take that away because we know via what Billy Donovan has told us so far in the situation, you're not going to see a lot of that, especially over the next 5 games or so as Lonzo's out for 10 games. But Josh Giddey's best lineup, where he's plus 29.4 as far as the point differential, is Josh Giddey, Ayo Dosunmu, Zach LaVine, P. Will, and Nikola Vucevic. What are we seeing there, right? And it presents an interesting trend because Kobe White's best lineup as well, when you look at it, is a lineup also that you have him and Kobe and him and Ayo Dosunmu out there together as well. Matter of fact, Kobe White's best 2 lineups are with him and Ayo Dosunmu's out there. That's going to be an interesting trend to watch because while I did say I haven't been as concerned as I thought I would coming into the season as Kobe and Josh Giddey working out together, the advanced analytics, and that's the eye test, right? Like, Kobe's learning to play off ball fine. I think he's adapted pretty well. It's more of a consistency thing that I've personally seen with Kobe White. But what we're seeing as far as what the analytics are telling us is that both Josh Giddey and Kobe White they're at their best when they're out there with Ayo Dosunmu rather than out there together. And that's through very small sample size. We're 5 games into the season, people. So I'm not trying to create like a conversation built around, oh, well, maybe Josh Giddey or Kobe shouldn't start. I know there are going to be some people that have this conversation after hearing this data, and that's fine. For the tone of conversation, let's have all the conversations possible, right? But it's just interesting to watch that at the early part of the season, the chemistry we already knew with Ayo and Kobe is there existing, and they're having some really good. Kobe and Ayo have basically played about a little over 100 and something possessions out there, which is a little bit below, right? When you add in all the combinations of Kobe and Ayo, because they've been out there with a lot of different combinations of players, but you're seeing that that Kobe and Ayo are best kind of together when they're on the court. And same thing for Josh Giddey. Josh Giddey's best 2 lineups are both when he's out there with Ayo Dosunmu. And that's something interesting to watch as the season develops as well to see is, and again, we knew that Ayo Dosunmu was going to be one of the glue guys of this team, right? We knew that. I said that coming in, his ability to play with anybody, right? Adapt his game, because if you need more offense, he can do that. If you need more defense, he can do that. You need him to be on ball, the on-ball guard, the off-ball guard. He's done that over the course of his career with the Chicago Bulls. He can guard multiple positions. So it makes sense that they have some of their best point differentials when they're out there, because keep in mind as well, Ayo is a defensive anchor. He's a player that can anchor your defense. So while Josh Giddey and Kobe White can score, right, they both can score, and the offensive balance, I think, is really good with them. What we're seeing is that the defense may be a thing out there for them as well to watch. But that's just something that in going over this that stood out to me, that Kobe and Josh Giddey both have some of their best lineups, not the ones with Lonzo Ball. Again, I'm only taking the Lonzo Ball one out because of the situation with Lonzo. As Lonzo's minutes restriction comes up, it's going to be another conversation to have, right? But they're both of their best lineups are when Ayo Dosunmu's out there. Then you look at Zach LaVine. The lineup that he has, other than when Lonzo's out there, as far as the best point differential, is him, Josh Giddey, Ayo Dosunmu, Zach LaVine, P. Will, Nikola Vucevic. Basically your starting lineup, but you're just flipping that lineup and having Ayo in there instead of Kobe White. That is a point differential of plus 29.4, whereas with that starting lineup, of course, Zach LaVine has that negative 15-point differential. So just something to look out for there as well. But otherwise, with Zach LaVine, what we're seeing, two of his best lineups are out there with Josh Giddey and Ayo Dosunmu, and his other two best lineups are out there with Lonzo Ball in both those lineups as well. There's actually a really good one with Kobe, Lonzo, Zach, P. Will, and Nikola Vucevic. So basically your starting lineup, but you're flipping Lonzo in there instead of Kobe White. That has a positive point differential of plus 23.1, but we've only seen 13 possessions for that team, for that lineup. So again, small sample size, but interesting data when it comes down to it. Patrick Williams, Patrick Williams' best lineup as well is out there with Ayo Dosunmu. Same starting lineup, flip Ayo with Kobe. That's his best one. And the same thing is Kobe White, Ayo, Dalen Terry, P. Will, Jalen Smith. That's Patrick Williams' other best lineup out there. That's the positive 64.4 point differential with that lineup. So yeah, again, and that's a lineup that has more defense, right? So you look at Ayo, Dalen, and Patrick Williams out there with Kobe White and Jalen Smith. Kobe and Jalen aren't necessarily the best defenders, and they're way better offensively. But then you have the nice offense-defensive balance of Ayo, and then you kind of have Dalen Terry and Patrick Williams out there together. And another one as well, Patrick Williams and Julian Phillips are an interesting lineup to watch as well. They've played only a combo of about 40 possessions together, but all of those different lineups with Julian Phillips, and Patrick Williams out there together are all positive point differentials. All of them are positive point differentials. So there may be something about that, especially having these versatile forwards that can guard multiple positions. Maybe that's something to look out for and explore as well. And then you get to Nikola Vucevic. Him is that same lineup with Zach LaVine. His best point differential, other than with Lonzo, is out there with Josh Giddey, Ayo, Zach LaVine, P. Will, and Nikola Vucevic. So it's just something to watch. Lineups are such an important part of the game, right? And I know it's basketball nerdy. I know it's not for everybody to get into the weeds, and I may lose a lot of people who are watching unless you just want that advanced analytic type talk. But we got to have that as well. We got to talk about the advanced analytics because the chess match of basketball, right? The X's and O's portion is about leveraging your lineups. It's about leveraging and exploring massive matchups and how you can get the best out of specific matchups. And we're seeing Billy Donovan. We've used so many different lineups so far this season. A lot of them. We have the Bulls have used over 30 lineups. And when you look at a roster that's going 10 deep, it's wild to say that. We've used and those lineups also factor in players playing different positions, right? So there are some of those where it's the same lineup, but maybe you have Patrick Williams playing the 3 or Julian Phillips playing the 4, vice versa, right? But we've used a lot of different matchups so far in the early part of the season. And to me, that speaks towards Billy Donovan trying to find the right balance, but also the versatility that we have here on this team. This is one of the most plug-and-play teams that Billy Donovan has had since he's been here with the Chicago Bulls. So the fact that we have the ability to play so many different lineups, so many players that can play multiple positions, right? When you look at it, just about almost every player on this Bulls team can play multiple. Josh Giddey is always better at point guard than any other position. Vooch is always better at center than any other position. But then when you look at everybody else, Kobe can play the 1 or the 2. Ayo can play the 1, 2, or the 3. Zach LaVine can play the 2 or the 3, right? Patrick Williams can play the 3 or the 4, or hell, we're using him as a small ball 5. Julian, same thing, the 3 or the 4, right? So when you have Jalen Smith, the 4 or the 5, right? So when you have so many different lineup combinations, it really, I'm sure it makes it fun as a head coach to try to find that balance, right? That would make it fun for me. And so as we go forth into the season, just to watch how that continues to develop for this team, I think it's going to be really fun to watch. Another interesting stat that I did not point out yesterday as well, getting off lineups, is that the Chicago Bulls are averaging the second fewest personal fouls per game in the entire NBA. That's crazy. We're also allowing 19.8 opponent free throws per night. And right now, the Bulls, even with them not being the best defenders, but them still trying to guard out on the perimeter, the Bulls are contesting shots without necessarily fouling a lot. And that's something to watch for there as well. Now, I would like to see the Bulls get to the free throw line a little bit more, but if the Bulls, even with their weak defenders, are not going to put teams on the free throw line, that makes it more difficult when the Bulls do have leads. And that's why we're seeing even in the games where the Bulls get out to large deficits early, when the Bulls do retake those leads, it's more difficult for the other teams to get back into games because the Bulls are hitting threes at a great rate, right? We've already talked about that. We're top 5 to 7 in almost every three-point category for the NBA so far. So when you're not having that math problem that the Bulls had in prior years, you're not getting efficient shots because you're not getting to the free throw line. It's bringing an interesting dynamic between the Bulls' offense and defense, one that's going to be really interesting and fun to watch as this season develops for this team. But I know I threw a lot of numbers at you guys there. I know I did. But let me know what you guys think about that. As far as the lineups, the versatility of the lineups, kind of what we're seeing so far with that starting lineup, some of the Bulls' best lineups at this early part of the season as well. How would you like to see those explored more by this Bulls team? Let me know what you guys think on all that down below. But it's crazy that a lineup with Lonzo Ball has a positive point differential of plus 91 and 233 points per 100 possessions. That's crazy. Small sample size, but that's just, as a basketball guy that likes to get into the weeds of the analytics, that's crazy. That's crazy. Now, the Bulls do take on the Brooklyn Nets today. And this is a game where we could be without Zach LaVine. He got updated yesterday that he has a sprained AC joint. That's what happened. I don't even know what an AC joint is. It is what it is. Like, I'm sure I've smoked the AC joint at some point in my life, but that's a prior life. I was younger, smoked a lot of joints. It is what it is. So the AC joint is the joint where the collarbone and the shoulder blade meet. So there you guys go. Some quick medical analytics from Haize. Listen, you got your basketball analytics, you're getting your medical analytics here. But so Zach LaVine is questionable for tonight's game against the Brooklyn Nets. Now, the Brooklyn Nets are a team where nobody really expected much from the Brooklyn Nets coming into the season, but the Nets are 2-3 on the season, and they actually have some wins against some teams that were expected to be playoff teams. They beat the Memphis Grizzlies yesterday, right? On Wednesday, and then they beat the Milwaukee Bucks Sunday as well. Now, the Bucks, they're struggling. It is what it is when it comes down to the Bucks. But the Brooklyn Nets are a team that has some offensive firepower, right? And so the Bulls are going to have to be prepared for a team that can still fill it up. Like, they aren't the most sound team, but you look at it. Dennis Schroeder is averaging 24 points per game for this team. He's also leading the team in assists at 8.2. What that's doing is it's freeing up Cam Thomas to do a little bit more. Cam Thomas is averaging 27 points per game. They also have Cam Johnson averaging 14, Zaire Williams averaging 11, Dorian Finney-Smith averaging 10, right? So they have the ability to put up some points. And in this early part of the season, anybody can beat anybody. And with the Bulls missing Lonzo, we'll see what's happening with Jalen Smith, and potentially missing Zach LaVine. Those are three key players that are important to what the Chicago Bulls are trying to do night in and night out. This Bulls team is going to have to be locked in. They're going to absolutely have to be locked in. You cannot. I get it. We're on a 2-game winning streak. We're above 500 for the first time. But this is historically where the Bulls have had a letdown. And we do not want to have a letdown, especially a letdown against the Brooklyn Nets of all teams. You need to be locked in this game. And I'm not saying in any way to expect a blowout, right? If you've watched me for a while, you know I'm not somebody who, I don't care who the opponent is. I typically don't say, let's expect to blow them out of the water. You got to come in and execute. The Brooklyn Nets are putting up 118 points per game, which is in the top 10 in the NBA. I think it's actually in the top 6 in the NBA in points per game. Now, while the Bulls are also averaging 113 points per game, we also know that the Bulls defense is giving up almost 120 points per game. So, you know, it went down 116 after last game. So good there. Good to the Chicago Bulls there. They have to absolutely be locked in. And if they're not, it's going to be a long day because this is a Brooklyn Nets team that can surprise the Chicago Bulls. Now, their defense is nothing to write home about either. They're allowing 117 points per game, so the Bulls got to be prepared for that. One thing that has also worked for the Chicago Bulls is their defensive rebounding. The Bulls are the best defensive rebounding team in the league. The team closest to them is the OKC Thunder, and we're averaging 4 more defensive rebounds per game than what the OKC Thunder. The Bulls are by far the best defensive rebounding team in the league, and so that's something that the Bulls absolutely need to leverage. You also look at the Brooklyn Nets; they're one of the worst offensive rebounding teams in the league. So this is one of those games where the Bulls' strength of defensive rebounding, because they do it from all 5 positions more times than not, they're going to have to use that to get out in their pace, get into the pace that's been killing teams. But we also know that we have to limit turnovers. You got to limit turnovers. If you don't, it's going to be a long night for you, right? And so the Bulls turnovers are getting better, right? We went from being the second highest team in turnovers, only second to the Toronto Raptors, to we're all the way towards now in the bottom 10, right? So we're getting better at that. We're now averaging 15.8 turnovers per game after averaging almost 18 after the first 3 games. We got to take care of the basketball. If the Bulls take care of the basketball while rebounding the ball well, getting out into transition, right, getting to that pace they like to play with, and hit their three-pointers effectively, this is a team that can compete with anybody on the offensive side of the ball. But surprisingly enough as well, the Bulls are 7th in defensive rating in the entire NBA. So we know that we have that extra gear we can go into defensively. We're going to need to double down on that in this game against the Brooklyn Nets. The Bulls' defense has to be sound. Does it have to be shut down? No, but it has to be sound. We have to get out. We have to rotate out on their shooters. We got to fight hard. If the Bulls do that, they can win this game. They can win this game against the Brooklyn Nets. And listen, I hope that the Bulls do. They're out on the road. They want to take care of business. The Bulls are riding some really good momentum and confidence as well. Take care of work against the Brooklyn Nets. The Bulls team that had struggles winning 3 games in a row over the last 3 seasons, if they could win 3 games in a row to start off this season, over their first 6 games to have 3 games in a row, listen, that's big for a Chicago Bulls team in my opinion. So this needs to be where the Bulls the execution needs to be at the forefront. And with us potentially missing Lonzo, with us potentially missing we'll be missing Lonzo, potentially missing Jalen Smith and Zach LaVine in this game, it's going to be important for that players step up hugely. And if Zach LaVine's out, I probably expect Ayo Dosunmu to be inserted into that starting lineup as the 3. Still going to be small, but we know that's at least more defense. And Ayo Dosunmu starting to catch his rhythm as well offensively. So we'll see what this game has in store for the Chicago Bulls. Overall, I'm excited about it. We'll be live here. You already know. Live every single game, pre-game, halftime hangout, and post-game shows, all live on the channel. So make sure you guys stay in tune with us for that. Otherwise, follow us at Bulls Central Pod. You send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullscentralpod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the #1 spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, but that's thanks to you lovely and beautiful people. And like I like to end everything on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.